Let's talk about Roberto Luongo going into the Ring of Honor tonight. The thing I told you guys before the show is I don't want to have the debate again about should it be Ring of Honor or should it be jersey retirement, because all three of us agree that it should be jersey retirement. And I don't think any of us want to, well, I definitely don't want to get into that part of the discussion, because today is Roberto Luongo's day. I want to focus on Roberto Luongo, the player, what he meant to the city, and not even in the sense of, oh, he should have had his jersey retired. I'm not trying to do that today. It's going to be a great ceremony tonight. He's got a speech prepared. I'm really looking forward to that. And all these pregame ceremonies, let's not forget, they've just knocked them out of the park lately, starting with the Sedin's jersey retirement with Kevin Bieksa doing stand-up comedy for 45 minutes. That was fantastic. Starting there, moving all the way down to where we're at now, and they've had them over the years. They've been crushing these lately. So I'm hopeful that tonight, and I'm confident that tonight will be the same with Roberto Luongo going up into the Ring of Honor.
Yeah, what stands out to me about Luongo and the 2011 core as a whole is they transcended Canucks fandom. And what I mean by that is there are countless occasions where you run into people in the city who aren't Canucks fans, but when you tell them, when they ask you, oh, what do you do for work? And you bring up that, oh yeah, I'm a Canucks reporter. It isn't Pedersen or Hughes or Miller or anybody on the current team that immediately comes to mind. It's always the Sedins and Luongo. Immediately, people's eyes light up when they remember that era. It was a special era too, because it was around the time of the 2010 Olympics as well. And I find that so cool because that happened over a decade ago now. So the fact that casual, Vancouverites weren't even hockey fans still remember with such fondness the impact that Luongo, the Sedins, Kessler, Burrows, the entire 2011 core had, to me, that speaks volumes, because it is so difficult to transcend your bubble of hockey fans, and yet that's what Luongo literally did.
He spoke about his time in Vancouver this morning, and I think he put that so nicely that I don't like, I'm not saying he was a diva and made himself bigger than the team, but for a while he was bigger than the team, like in terms of just popularity and what he meant to the people of this city. Like you just said it, when you hear Vancouver Canucks, a lot of people in this city still think about Roberto Luongo. They obviously think about that era's team. And look, he's the greatest goalie in franchise history without a shadow of a doubt. One of the best goalies of all time. Definitely top 5, if not top 3. I got into it this morning on Daily Faceoff Live with our pal Frank Saravalli when I threw out Luongo's a top 3 goaltender. He brought up Marty Brodeur. There's an interesting discussion to be had there, but I'll just say it, like Marty Brodeur, Luongo was robbed of that Vezina in his first year with the Vancouver Canucks. And Lachlan Irvin wrote a really good piece over at Canucks Army that went live literally moments ago before we started recording here. And he kind of dove into the numbers a bit, and I don't even think you have to dive into the numbers to understand what Luongo meant to this city, and the level of greatness that he brought to the Vancouver goal crease. And I'm going to reference it because I reference it all the time, but Scott Rintoul's West Coast Express podcast series, that was a really good way to learn about what the Canucks were like before that era and before where they are now, and how really after the trade of Kirk McLean, it was a goalie graveyard. Like everybody called Vancouver a goalie graveyard. Vancouver is one of the most elite goaltending departments in the entire league, and basically has since Roberto Luongo came to Vancouver. Now I know Ian Clark gets a lot of credit for that, but it's also the guys in the crease, right? Like those guys, a lot of them getting trained by Ian Clark. Those guys did the work, and Luongo really set the standard for great goaltending in Vancouver. And now we're seeing a guy like Thatcher Demko, who's obviously coming into his own as well. But I think he means so much more than whatever you can see on his Hockey DB page.
Yeah, and before you really saw the Sedins, Kessler, Burrows, all of them really hit their stride, before you saw the likes of Hamhuis and Ehrhoff join the blue line, and the team's depth really improving, the team through like 2007, 2008 felt like it was really carried by Luongo by a significant extent. And during that era, they felt really comfortable sort of playing a higher event style of hockey where, the defenseman would be pinching, and they'd be comfortable allowing rush chances because they knew they had Luongo to bail them out. And as you sort of alluded to as well, the way that he was able to continue to evolve and refine his game to where in those early days he was making so many desperation saves, and it was fun, it was athletic, but then later in his career sort of developing and maturing so that he was more technically sound, didn't have to rely as much on those spectacular spectacular saves where he's diving and originally out of position and recovering. It was just really cool to see him sort of be the backbone for so long, and again continue to evolve. And I mean, even the 2010 Olympics, I know it's not um, his time with the Canucks, but seeing that happen in Rogers Arena, Brodeur was originally the starter there, and he sort of, I remember the first time Canada played the US, and the US scored a ton of goals, and the confidence was a little down for sort of Canada going into the final, knowing that okay, earlier in the tournament US kind of lit them up a little bit. But then Luongo, after that US game, I think it was, really stabilizing the crease. And I'm glad that even though he wasn't able to win a Stanley Cup, I'm really, really glad he was able to win that Olympic gold medal in Rogers Arena. Overall, people will reference, yeah, his heart at times was maybe in Florida, but by far the most meaningful and important stretch of hockey he had was played in Vancouver.
And Luongo would tell you the same thing because he spoke this morning about his time in Vancouver when he did a press conference at Rogers Arena, and we have the clip here. Let's listen to Roberto Luongo reflecting on his time in Vancouver.
It was the most important stretch of my career. I think, it was when I was in my prime. We had a great team. We were in the playoffs. We made a run to the cup. Played in the Olympics in the city, which is unbelievable when you think about it. That it all came together like that. So it's a huge, huge part of my life. Always will be.
Always will be. And basically word for word what you just said. Let's talk a little bit about that Olympic gold medal win, because that was another thing that Luongo spoke about as well. Let's hear the clip first, Grady, of the gold medal win for Roberto Luongo.
I only remember the last play. So, and I watch it all the time because it always comes up, right? And I don't want to say too much because a lot of it has to do with my speech tonight, so I don't want to give everything away. But when the goal happened, I just remember there was so much pressure right in that moment, given that it was the Olympics in Vancouver, Team Canada. I just felt like such a huge weight lifted off your shoulders because we wanted to get this done, obviously, and we wanted to get it done on home soil. And it's just a euphoric feeling when the goal went in.
I think everybody would describe it that way. I can't remember what happened in that game. I only remember the final goal. Can you remember that game very well?
Yeah, it's crazy because I remember being glued to the TV. The US, I think, scored a late goal to force the OT, and I remember watching OT, and for a second, our TELUS TV went out. There was an error message on the box, and that was exactly when they scored. And as soon as we got the feedback, it was them celebrating. So we actually missed the goal.
Was that a mass breakout, or was that just
don't know.
for you? Oh my gosh, that's horrible. That's a horrible story. I didn't know that happened. That's
well,
horrible.
I mean, it's not horrible because as soon as it came back on, they're celebrating. So
no, trust me,
immediately celebrating.
That's horrible. Trust me. You've
Dude,
seen
all
the
I
goal.
cared was they won.
So, oh man, no. Watching the build up and everything that's happened
horrible.
In the
what
lead
would
up,
have been horrible is if the states had won. Is if
sure,
you're just watching the Americans celebrate. I didn't care. I didn't care that I missed it. I just care that they won.
I guess we would have been 9 or 10 years old during that game.
Do you guys remember in the round robin of the Olympics that year, the States actually had beaten Canada with Martin Brodeur in goal? And much like 2002 Olympics, Ed Belfour had started, or sorry, I think it was Curtis Joseph, because he was Pat Quinn's was the coach then, and it was Marty Brodeur who ended up taking over. And then 2010 comes along. Of course, there was 2006 in between there, and it was kind of like passing of the torch. Luongo came in and, you know, shut it down against was it Slovakia in the semifinals, I want to say. And then they went back to him for that gold medal game, and he was excellent.
Now, all I remember of Marty Brodeur in that tournament is there was a play where the puck came in and it was elevated, it was in the air, and he went to bat it out of the air like a baseball bat and then put it right up the middle, and the other team
I remember
scored.
that play.
And then I just remember that being on all the highlight reels of like why he was not going to be in the tournament anymore. And then from there, Luongo played. I don't remember the opponent. I don't remember the score. Like I said, 9 or 10 years old, folks. I don't remember anything other than him swinging at the puck, and obviously he liked to play the puck a lot. He was like a better version of Mike Smith, one might say. But that's all I remember of that tournament with Marty Brodeur.
Better version of Mike Smith.
One might say it. One might say it. Others call him a top 3 goalie. I just say a better Mike Smith.
Wow.
Okay. Do you have anything else you wanted to get to on? Actually, no. Sorry, I want to talk about Luongo the person a little bit more, because there were very high highs in Vancouver and there were very low lows in Vancouver for Roberto Luongo. This guy who'd been booed at Rogers Arena. This is a guy who also had "We Want Lou" chants reverberating through BC Place when Eddie Lack got the start in that Heritage Classic game. And if you haven't listened to it already, Mike Gillis did an interview yesterday on our friends with Sakaris and Price, who recorded in this very studio if you haven't heard already. He did an interview with them yesterday, and he provided a lot of insight on a lot of different things, said he thought Luongo should have his jersey retired. But one thing I really found interesting was talking about that decision to start Eddie Lack in the Heritage Classic. And he talked about how he was used to everybody being on the same page and working closely with Alain Vigneault. And we know that's where, you know, the organizational dysfunction really started, was when John Tortorella was the coach. And look, we know the dysfunction didn't really end until very recently. But yeah, it was a very, very interesting answer from Mike Gillis, because, you know, kind of ripped into John Tortorella a bit, as I think he should at this stage. And that's another thing that I find interesting. And one thing I want to highlight is just that Luongo, toward the end of his career, you know, with the Strombone account and everything, even with Vancouver media, he was able to poke fun at himself. He took things a lot less personally. And you saw the maturation of the player, right? And I think as everybody gets older in this industry and in this game, a lot more honesty comes out. So I think that's why you're hearing the answer from Mike Gillis. But that's why I also think you heard this answer from Luongo on his infamous "My contract sucks" quote.
It was an incredible line in the moment, but with the benefit of hindsight now, did your contract suck?
Well, you know, I don't even know how to respond to that, but I'll just give you a little bit of the background over that. I literally 15 minutes before I came out found out that I wasn't getting traded to Toronto. So it was a little bit emotional at that very time. Didn't really have time to regroup. And, you know, obviously, the contract didn't suck, but for certain reasons it did. Yeah, I just remember it being so emotional in that very moment, just because of what had transpired 15 minutes prior, that I wish I would have had a few more minutes to maybe gather myself before I went out there.
I feel for the guy. Like, that's as honest of an answer as you're going to get. And yeah, like, you can tell Vancouver meant a lot to him. He meant a lot to the people of Vancouver. I don't have anything else on that. I just find Roberto Luongo to be a very fascinating character in this city and in this franchise's history. Like, I think I don't know, he's probably the most interesting guy to follow in terms of his story with the Vancouver Canucks. I think he has one of the most interesting stories of any Vancouver Canuck.
No doubt. And as you mentioned, later in his career, and of course, since he's retired, I think he's gained a lot of perspective. And that's where the humor, some of the self-deprecation comes from, is even when he was referencing the Olympic win, so much of it wasn't just a pure euphoria. It was the weight off his shoulder. That's the first thing that he referenced. So for a big chunk of his time in Vancouver in his prime, I'm sure he just felt, I don't want to say overwhelmed, but the pressure of playing in this market with cup expectations, with some of the storylines around the team's playoff performance, that must have been absolutely crushing. And so I think it's really, really cool that he's been able to since then, find ways to gain a different perspective and free himself of that towards the end of his career. And his Twitter account is just legendary at this point.
Yeah. And I was just going to mention the Twitter account, and being a captain, the only goalie in NHL history, being a captain of a team in a Canadian market when, say he had a bad game or the team had a rough night, he was always the one having to go answer in front of the microphones and meet the media in those post-game scrums. And a lot of the time, it's not really fair to have your goaltender put into those situations. So he shouldered that for 2 years. And if people want to know more about that, I encourage you to listen to that Mike Gillis interview. But I really thought the Twitter account kind of allowed him to come out of his shell in a self-deprecating way where he wouldn't take himself too serious. And we've all seen the quotes about the Anaheim incident in the playoffs there, and just some of the other tweets he's had over the years about the Eddie Lack Heritage Classic thing. And I think that's really allowed people to warm up to him as the person. We all know how great he was for the Canucks in the crease, but he kind of really came out of his own shell when that Twitter account came to life, when first people weren't unsure, were unsure if it was him or not, but then we kind of realized, well, it was him. And that was one of the things Gillis talked about, is that the team loved it, and not only the players but the executives and the coaches thought it was fantastic too. And once that pressure had kind of been taken off of him, no longer being the team captain, you saw this personality come to life.
One thing I found interesting that Luongo said in every interview he's done today, and in the days leading up, is that he, one, doesn't regret being the Canucks captain, and it's something that he prides himself on most in his career. And I think that's a bit of a surprising answer to hear because, just with how it all went, but he takes a lot of pride that he was the captain of the Vancouver Canucks, kind of like what Grady alluded to. No one can say they did that. No one can say they did that in a Canadian market. Only a handful of people have been captains in Canadian markets. So it's, it was interesting to hear that perspective. One thing he did today at his press conference was clear the air about a trade request. I think it was Ian McIntyre who asked him about this, about the move to Florida and all that sort of stuff. So let's hear that clip, Grady. This was Roberto Luongo this morning, clearing the air about a trade request.
Well, it wasn't a trade request, so I don't know what the story is, but it was more of a mutual with Mike Gillis. I think Corey was coming on, and we had a discussion at the end of the year, and it was, I think we decided that it was best, if I think I moved on and Corey was the guy. So it wasn't really a trade request. I think it was more of a mutual decision. And at that time, Corey was lights out. So obviously I obliged, and we tried to work together to work something out.
We don't have the clip of this, but I want to read this answer as well, because he took the other chance he had to clear the air on something else about going on LTIR instead of retiring, which obviously triggered that salary cap recapture penalty for the Vancouver Canucks for 3 seasons. This was what he said about that. Well, it wasn't my call, unfortunately. I would have loved to go on LTIR and make a few extra dollars, but it wasn't my call. At that point in my career, it was a tough year. Talked about how it was hard. He had to do all this stretching. We've heard about the foam roller for 3 hours before every single game just to get out on the ice. But the big thing is that he said it wasn't my decision to retire and not go on LTIR. So I found that to be a very, very interesting answer. Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
Related to that contract, some people will reference that, or use that against him. I think ultimately the league in the first place should have never punished the Canucks retroactively for a contract that was perfectly legal when it was signed.
Oh, absolutely. And like Gillis said yesterday on Scarce and Price when he did the interview with them, he said there's a rumor out there that the Canucks were told that this would be against the rules. And he's like, no, we didn't. And if we had, we would have never signed it. And I believe Mike Gillis when he says that. So yeah, if you haven't heard it already, folks, go listen to this Carson Price interview yesterday, Wednesday, December 13th edition of Carson Price. They had Mike Gillis on, and it was a great interview with the former Canucks president and general manager. Okay, do you have anything else on Luongo before we go to the game?
I just want to say, I think it's referencing his Twitter account. Do you remember back in 2020 when the pandemic first hit, the Canucks Twitter March Madness?
Yes. Oh, yes. I know where you're going with this. I thought about this today. Go on.
So it's funny. Basically, for people that aren't aware, I think it was Daryl Keeping who was basically trying to crown the unofficial winner of Canucks Twitter. Basically created a bracket style tournament where he would pit Twitter accounts against each other with a poll-like format. Canucks Twitter would vote, I guess, who they like more, right? So they might pit me and you against each other, and then people would vote. And it was a tournament style. So the finals come. It's me versus Roberto Luongo. Somehow for the beginning part of it, I had like a 53 or 54% lead. And then I get a message from Lou. And keep in mind, up until this point, I'd never interacted with him personally.
Yeah.
But he messages me and says, I might have to dust off my Twitter to get some votes, it seems. And then I laughed and I was like, do it, game on. I was like, you can make a joke about me being like 10 years old during the 2011 run or something. And then he like quote tweets the bracket, and he's like, 10 years ago, we were both crapping our pants. One was in diapers, the other was in the playoffs. My psyche can't take another L. And then the tweet got like almost 2,000 likes, and it was hilarious seeing the votes shift in a matter of like 5 minutes. Just hundreds of votes piling in for Lou, and he won. I thought that was hilarious, and again, just goes to show how funny and sort of involved he's been on the Twitter sphere.
And there's some of that self-deprecating humor that we're talking about. Just hilarious. Oh man. His Twitter account is so much fun. Canucks Conversation with Harmon and Quads every weekday at 2 p.m. Be sure to check it out on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. And if you missed it, go check it out on your favorite podcast catcher app.